Greetings and welcome to the Wealth for Real YouTube channel. I'm your host, Christopher Anastasio. It is the evening of Friday, December 8th, 2023. I hope everybody's having a great holiday season and ready for the weekend. This video is about a tweet from Unusual Whales about how Americans say their income isn't keeping up with inflation. And so I really just want to talk briefly with you guys about this for a moment. And so I think the thing about this, guys, that, so I made a recent video about how another Unusual Whales tweet or post had talked about how Generation Z plans to retire at 54. And when I made that video, you guys can check it out. I was sitting there saying, like, how is that physically possible? How is that humanly possible? How can they possibly plan to retire so early, no matter how hard they try, no matter how hard they work? They're up against forces that are just going to make that impossible. And so I think that when you look at this particular tweet here, this is more in line with what I'm feeling and seeing and thinking for all generations. I'm not talking about this particular generation or that particular generation. I'm talking about all the way across the board. Just look at some of these stats here. And again, this looks like it's kind of survey based. So, I mean, how scientific this is kind of up in the air. But I would say this is more like conservatively representative versus so in other words, it's understated is what I mean versus it's overstated. Okay, but you have 67% of Americans say income isn't keeping up with inflation, and 42% say their standard of living is declining. Well, let me start with the first number. If you're the type of person who has a job and every year you get a 2 to 4 or 3 to 5% raise, you are definitely not keeping up with inflation. And let me tell you why. I don't care what number they say inflation is at, 3%, 4%, 7%, 9%, whatever. It's higher. Whatever the number they say, it's higher. And the reason they say it that way is because their number excludes certain things. Okay, it excludes the type of things that you can't stop yourself from buying. You can't stop buying food, you can't stop buying gas, you can't stop paying for certain things. They're absolutely essential. And a lot of these statistics that you guys see, and I need to make a whole other video about the whole, like, how they come up with the statistic and what they actually exclude. But the point is that you even see it sometimes. They even sort of like talk about it. Like, let's say you see the number on CNBC or you see it reported in the Wall Street Journal. They'll say something like, core inflation is 3%, which excludes volatile items like food and gas, or something like that. Like they'll basically tell you, like, hey, this isn't all the things you're buying more than likely, so it makes the number look better, right? So we know that, even when inflation was 9.1% in June of 2022, that was lower than what it actually was for the things that people had to buy routinely at the grocery store, going to the gas pump, things like that. So unless you're getting, who knows what it is for real? I think they do put that number somewhere. They just don't really publicize it as much as the other number. But the bottom line, guys, is there's simply no way that most Americans, even a sizable minority of Americans, are at a job, unless, and I'm excluding if you get a big promotion or you go from this company to this company and they really lure you with like a big pay package or something, excluding that. You're at a job and every year you get a raise. You are not getting the 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% raise that you need to keep up with this inflation, this runaway out of control inflation that we're experiencing. And that, honestly, in my opinion, is actually only going to get worse, not better. And I have a whole hypothesis about that I go into in another video at some point. But if I do it now, then that'll become the whole video. So the point is that, of course, Americans' income isn't keeping up with inflation. I'm surprised that only 67% feel it. I would say this number probably should be, technically speaking, if you go by the numbers I was saying before, like how much do people actually get in a raise at work, that number should be in the 90s, because just about nobody's income is keeping up with inflation. If you go by a strict interpretation of this, if somebody's changing their lifestyle a little bit or trimming at the edges and then they still feel comfortable, that doesn't mean their income is keeping up with inflation by a literal definition of that. Okay. They say here, and 42% say their standard of living is declining per Empower. Okay, so 42% standard of living is declining. Well, guess what? I mean, that's what comes along with your income not keeping up with inflation. As your income doesn't keep up, and you can't buy the things you used to, and you can't afford the things you used to, your standard of living declines. And this was baked into the cake, guys. Okay. As I said in the other video, you guys go watch the other video that I did on Unusual Whales on the whole Gen Z retiring at 54. Actually, excuse me. This comment that I'm about to say is tied to a previous video from a couple days ago about the viral TikTok video where the nurse talked about her and her husband are in middle-class America, but they can't afford, if their furnace goes out, they can't afford if something happens to their car, stuff like that. And I talked about the fact that middle class is disappearing. I mean, in a very stark sort of way. I don't mean that, esoterically or in a literal monetary-based way. There's no middle class, right? There's poor people, there's very wealthy people, and there are people, the debtor class in the middle. Going into debt to finance a home, going into debt to finance a car, going into debt for a student loan, going into debt on credit cards to eat out, to go on vacation, to buy plane tickets, always thinking later they will pay it off when there's not going to be a later. So there is no middle class where you have, where you have this sizable band of people who get a job, get paid, and have tons of money left over to do all kinds of fun stuff. It's just gone. Of course, are there exceptions to that rule? Of course there are. I'm being a little bit broad here in what I'm saying. But the bottom line, guys, is the middle class is disappearing very quickly. It's the silent tax of inflation, okay, as we're talking about right here. Okay, the silent tax of inflation is eating away at how much you can afford. So you're making money and it's going up a little bit every year, and you think you're doing better each year, but you're noticing it just doesn't buy as much. And lately, over the last 2+ years, it really isn't buying enough. It really is not supporting your standard of living the way that you were used to. So this tweet here by Unusual Whales is the one I expected to see. The one in the other video about Gen Z retiring at 54, I didn't expect to see that tweet. I don't understand how anybody thinks that's actually going to happen. And like I said, I'm rooting full force for Gen Z to make it happen, but I just don't see how they can fight that inexorable tide of inflationary silent tax and the inevitable decline in standard of living. So anyway, guys, if you don't follow Unusual Whales, tremendous source of data and information like this, this sort of thing, really, really, really appreciate the Unusual Whales account. I'm a huge fan of them. So a lot of the content you see me talk about, guys, if I'm reposting tweets on TikTok or here or there, or whatever, like half the time it's probably Unusual Whales. So really, really love their content. And this was an example of something that's very illuminating that they put out. So anyway, love to hear what you guys think. What's going on with you personally? Are you keeping up with inflation? Is your standard of living declining? How are you kind of dealing with that? What are you seeing? We'd definitely love to start a conversation around that and hear what your guys' thoughts are about, whether you think it's going to get any better or get worse or whatever the case may be. So again, hope everybody's having a great holiday season. Hope everybody has a great weekend. And really, really appreciate the support for the channel. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the share button. Anything that you do along those lines is very much appreciated, guys. But once again, have a great night. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.